All right, if you watched the video from last time, you saw us talk about on Monday the I don't know what that is. The Marbury versus Madison case, and which we talked about in class on Monday as being one of the most important of the Supreme Court decisions. It is, it is very early in the history of the Supreme Court, and it is one of the, and still remains, one of the most important decisions handed down by the court. And I told them kind of on Monday that this is really important, and of course you're going to see it again. So you want to make sure you go and look at that part as you read it. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Jefferson's presidency, and besides the Marbury versus Madison case, which is kind of a sidelight. But we're going to talk about Jefferson, the president. We're going to talk about some of the things that he does. And I want you guys to understand that Jefferson's presidency is sort of an enigma. I pointed this out last time to them, that Jefferson says a lot of things before he's president. Okay, he talks about this and talks about that. He's an ideologue, okay? He has all of these ideas that he is pretty strict in believing until he becomes president. And then all of a sudden he has to go against some of those things for what he feels to be the betterment of the country. And it really kind of, I think in some ways, kind of turns Jefferson inside out a little bit, because all of his life he said these things, and then all of a sudden he becomes president, and the importance of, or the betterment of the country takes over, and he has to do things that he isn't necessarily comfortable with. Now, the Marbury versus Madison case is kind of a sidelight, but one of the biggest things that happens during Jefferson's first term is this, okay? The Louisiana Purchase. The Louisiana Purchase in American history is, again, I can't kind of overstate this, one of the most important things that happens. It doubles the size of the country. It opens up new land for exploration and then eventually for settlement. It gives us access, permanent access to the Mississippi River and to New Orleans, which is something that we've almost really had to go to war over several times to try to keep that open for us, because without access to New Orleans, we can't get any goods out of the interior of the country out through the Gulf. Okay, so you want to be able to use those waterways, and the Mississippi River is a huge waterway, and we want to be able to use that to get goods out of the interior of the country. But you can't get them out of New Orleans, you can't get them out of the Gulf, then that really doesn't do us any good. This chunk of land west of the Mississippi River has been problematic for us. Okay, if you go back to really about 1800, okay, you know that, and you realize that that map tells you that that chunk of land out there is Spanish land, okay? It has been since the treaty that ended the American Revolution. The Spanish dominate this area over here and have dominated Florida, okay? Now, we've had problems with Spain and had to make several treaties with Spain to guarantee us access to the Mississippi River and to New Orleans. You guys remember during Washington's administration, we signed Pinckney's Treaty, or the Treaty of San Lorenzo, with the Spanish because they were so afraid we were about to take it over anyway, that we got access to these areas. And so we kind of have maintained that status quo since. Until you get to about 1800 or so, okay? And then things start to change, okay? Mainly because of what's going on in France, okay? In 1799, the French Revolution ends after 10 years of massive revolution in Europe, okay, and in France in general. The French Revolution ends when a really hero of the revolution, a very ambitious and almost heroic, general takes control of France. Napoleon Bonaparte, who is fresh off fighting the British in Egypt, will sneak back home and will stage a coup. and will take control of France in 1799. Now, Napoleon tries to play it off like he is nothing more than first citizen, that the French are still a republic. Okay, that's a crock, okay? Really what France is being set up as is as a military dictatorship, okay, with Napoleon at the head, and Napoleon makes all the decisions. Napoleon, in some ways, is going to turn France into an empire. And he is going to become pretty bent on going out and conquering some of his rivals. So warfare in Europe is going to continue with Napoleon really steering the ship in a lot of places. Napoleon's conquests, though, are going to change the map, and they're going to change a lot of things that are going on internationally. Okay? Because of Napoleon becoming the head of France, secret treaties and pacts and agreements transfer Spanish land in 1800 to French land in 1801. And all of a sudden, after almost 50 years of not having a foothold in North America, okay, what happens? The French get back on to North America. They are now in control of this chunk of territory, okay? The Spanish are still in control of Florida, though, okay? But the French control this area west of the Mississippi. And of course, you can kind of see why this is problematic to us. Who have we made treaties to guarantee that we had access to the Mississippi River in New Orleans with? Spain. Okay? Spain doesn't own that land anymore. Who controls it now? France. Do we have a treaty with France that gives us access to the Mississippi River in New Orleans? No. And so herein lies the problem. Okay? As really this land starts to change hands, and as Napoleon becomes more and more influential, we are going to have more and more trouble getting access to the Mississippi River and getting our goods out of New Orleans. Jefferson is pro-French. Okay? Jefferson has always been pro-French. Jefferson has always been pro-French in his foreign policy. Right? So Jefferson should think, hey, this is a great thing, right? The French are now in control of this. We can go and make it. Except what? France has gone from a republic, technically, to what? A military dictatorship. Jefferson's not a fan of military dictators. Okay? See Declaration of Independence. Remember that thing? Okay? And so, what do we do? If the French start to keep us out of New Orleans, or start to limit our access to New Orleans, or start to ban us from New Orleans, what does Jefferson do? And if it required war to open this back up, Jefferson would even probably consider allying himself with the British to get the French out of New Orleans, which is a total opposite, a complete flip from what he has done most of his life. So, once again, I told you that sometimes the realities of the office change the way that you conduct yourself and some of the things that you believe. So, New Orleans is the big deal, okay? Many Americans, including Jefferson, okay, because Jefferson was, you're already seeing westward expansion going on. Okay, Tennessee and Kentucky have already sort of moved into the Union. People are pushing out there. Okay, and New Orleans has become the key. If we are going to continue to push westward, New Orleans has become a key to our prosperity. We have to be able to get goods out of the interior of the country and out into the rest of the world. Otherwise, that port city does us no good. And so Jefferson kind of takes it on himself to try to solve this issue, okay? As president, he decides that he's going to try to by New Orleans. Okay? So Jefferson's plan starts out pretty small. Really what he wants is New Orleans. Okay? So Jefferson knows that Napoleon is not going to let us continue to use New Orleans. So instead of waiting around for the inevitable or waiting around till war breaks out, okay, he is going to send some commissioners to France to try to buy New Orleans from the French. Okay? So we send ambassadors to France. Okay? And they are told essentially, hey, you get over there, you can offer Napoleon up to, let's say, $10 million. Okay? So you go and you offer Napoleon $10 million max, okay, for us to get New Orleans. Okay? And so the negotiations begin. Now, Napoleon has no desire to negotiate with us. Okay? France has gotten a foothold. France is looking good. Why on earth would Napoleon even consider giving up New Orleans? Which, of course, is why Jefferson is already sort of thinking about maybe allying with the British to take it back by force if we have to. The problem is that Napoleon is so active, and Napoleon is such a polarizing figure that wars in Europe have continued to the point to where we feel like we can use the British to our advantage. Okay? And Napoleon knows that too. He's not an idiot. Okay? Napoleon, though, has a lot on his plate. Okay, there are lots of things going on. There's a circus going on around Napoleon. Okay? And there is lots of things happening. By, let's say, 1802, 1803, Napoleon's starting to gear up for pushing his armies out into the rest of Europe. And Napoleon has a lot on his mind in Europe. But in, for example, French territory here in the New World, there's been a slave rebellion going on in Haiti ever since really about 1791 or so, okay? Led by Toussaint Louverture. Toussaint Louverture begins a slave revolt in Haiti that will last really throughout this period. Napoleon can't put it down, okay? And remember, besides really technically that chunk of Louisiana that's in New Orleans, or New Orleans and that chunk of Louisiana that's in North America, this is the only French colony left in the New World. And Napoleon can't really put the resources in to put down this slave rebellion. Okay? Napoleon doesn't want to risk all the resources, doesn't want to deal with this. It's a long supply line, and Napoleon's got other things to worry about. And so Napoleon starts to, in some ways, withdraw some of his interest from North America. All right, now mind you, Napoleon always thought that once he dealt with Europe, he could come back and deal with the West, okay? He always believed that he could then come back and take back over Haiti and then use that as a stepping stone to invade North America, okay? So whatever he does, he always felt like he could get it back, okay? But because of what's going on in Europe and because of really Toussaint Louverture's revolution, Napoleon really kind of abandons North America for a while to concentrate on Europe. Now what that means is he's in a bargaining mood, okay? And so when the American ambassadors arrive, okay, he decides to offer those American ambassadors not only New Orleans, but the entire Louisiana Territory for $15 million. Okay? Now look, Napoleon was in a bargaining mood. Haiti was lost. He's at war with Britain. He's about to be at war with the rest of Europe. Okay? Which, by the way, go pretty well for him. By 1805, Napoleon has defeated some of the major powers of Europe. By 1808, he's in control of virtually all of Europe. He has either defeated rivals like Austria or Prussia and has forced Russia to be a treaty state. He's conquered most of Italy. Napoleon is virtually in control of all of Europe except for England, okay, by 1808. So it's going well for Napoleon for a while, okay? But he doesn't feel like he can do anything with North America, so why not get rid of it, okay? And so Napoleon decides to offer us this entire piece of territory in New Orleans for $15 million. It is an excellent bargain. It will double the size of the United States for about 3 cents an acre. Okay? So, there is no doubt in Jefferson's mind that this has to be done. And Jefferson is going to authorize the purchase of this. Okay? And it is always considered to be one of Jefferson's greatest accomplishments. We are going to double the size of the United States without going to war. But that does not mean it's not controversial. Okay? It does not mean that this is not going to come at a price, and especially a political price. Jefferson's enemies make it a quick point to point out how much he hammered Hamilton about the Bank of the United States, and that it wasn't in the Constitution for the country to form a Bank of the United States. That you interpret the Constitution strictly, and if it's not there, you can't do it. And so all of Jefferson's enemies suddenly gang up on him and say, look, where in the Constitution does it say that the president has the right to buy land from a foreign power? Show it to me. Is it in there? No. And so, if that's true, how are you going to do this? If we all agree that that's not a constitutional power that the president wields, then what are we going to do? Jefferson can't just write a check for it. Okay? So how are we going to do that? Okay? Now, Jefferson is going to say that he does have the power because the president has the right to negotiate treaties. Those treaties must be approved by the Senate. And so Jefferson essentially takes a very loose constructionist argument and says, I do have the power to do this. Okay? I will do it because I can make a treaty. And so essentially what the treaty is going to say with Napoleon is, we're going to make a treaty with you, Napoleon. We're going to pay you $15 million and you're going to give us this chunk of land. Okay? Now, Jefferson, if this was flipped over, okay, and these were the Federalists trying to do this, Jefferson would have been having a stroke. Okay? But because he's in power, he has to rationalize this. And remember, Jefferson is an Enlightenment individual. He uses reason. Okay? Reason above all. And it is reasonable to do this. And he says it's for the best interest of the nation. Basically, he says it is like the case of a guardian investing the money of his ward in purchasing an important adjacent territory, saying to him when of age, I did this for your good. Okay? You may not like it. You may not think it's the best idea right now. But later on, you might look back on this and say, hey, that was a pretty good idea. And I was willing to take that risk for you. And that's what Jefferson does. In other words, Jefferson says, I'm going to take the heat. But this is worth it in the long run. And of course, he's right. All right, so there's a constitutional question about this, okay? Jefferson's enemies also point out to him, okay, that he the Federalists were afraid that this was just one more example of how Jefferson's party was changing America. With all this western land, you're going to encourage more agrarian settlement, more farming, okay? And that means that the Federalist Party is losing control. And so that's why they fight. That's why they harass Jefferson about the constitutionality of what he's doing. It's a political, I don't want to call it a game, but it is certainly a political chess match, and the Federalists are losing. And they realize that this move might be their own doom. Now look, they all know that this is good for the nation. Somewhere down deep inside, they all know that it's good for the nation. They just don't want Jefferson to do it. It makes him look good. And so they hammer him as much as they can. During Jefferson's early days as president, one of the things that he does, and I haven't really talked about this much, but now's as good a time as any. Jefferson will cut the nation's budget drastically. Jefferson is not a big fan of debt. Okay? But Hamilton believed that sometimes borrowing money, the nation borrowing money, was good. It's kind of like this idea that when you become 18, your parents think about this and think about stuff like this, okay? You need to establish credit because further down the line, you're going to have to buy yourself a house. You're going to have to buy yourself a car. And one of the ways that makes that easier for you is to have good credit. And so we as parents sometimes will encourage you, for example, to do things that could establish good credit. Okay? Get a credit card. Buy things with it, but pay it off. Okay? That gives you good credit. Pay your debts. Pay off your student loans. Okay? Do things like that. And that makes you a more attractive lendee, okay, to lenders later on. When you need a big loan to buy your first house, okay, or to buy your first car. Hamilton thought that's perfectly fine, okay, that debt like that is not necessarily a bad thing. But Jefferson, when he came into office, he decided to cut the nation's budget radically. Much to the chagrin of many of the programs that Jefferson cut back on. But, okay, 8 years down the road, Jefferson has cut the national debt drastically. Okay? It's been tough, but he has cut the nation's debt. What's our nation's debt today? Trillions of dollars. Okay? We owe trillions of dollars. Jefferson, though, is trying to cut, in the early 1800s, is trying to cut that national debt as much as he can. Uh-oh. So he has been hammering people over the budget. He has been hammering people over not spending money. And then all of a sudden, what? We can buy New Orleans and Louisiana for $15 million. So what do they all say? Hey, you have been talking about nothing but debt reduction. And now all of a sudden, what do you want to do? You cut all of our programs, and now what do you want to do? Go spend $15 million to buy some land. All right, okay? This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, okay? And Jefferson, like I said, feels that it is worth it, okay? And so he is going to really go against his policy of debt reduction in order to spend that money, okay? Now, you all know this is the United States today, okay? You overlay the Louisiana Purchase, and you can see the states that eventually come into the Union as part of the Louisiana Purchase, okay? So that gives you a good idea about the states that come into the nation in 1803 as part of the Louisiana Purchase.
Is that when the land grab?
Well, not yet, but yeah, we're getting there. Okay. So
Because my great
Mhm. Oh yeah.
was part of that.
Oh yeah, it's going to happen. The problem is, we're going to talk about this in a minute. The problem is that nobody knows what's out here. Okay. So there's not going to be a whole lot of land rush in the beginning because nobody knows where anything is. And plus, there's still a lot of land over here that hasn't been pushed into as well. Okay. So that green blob up there is what we get. Okay. All right. Eventually, okay, when you sort of kind of parse this all out, okay, you can see that why we say that doubles the country. It's almost a flip of what we already have. Okay. All right. Since nobody knows what's out there, this happens next. Jefferson in the spring of 1804 will send out an expedition to find out what's out there. Okay. Sends his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, and an army officer named William Clark to explore the northern part of the Louisiana Purchase. Okay. So head to St. Louis. Go figure out what's out there. Good luck to you, because we have no clue what's out there. And by the way, report back if you survive. Okay? So eventually, when the Corps of Discovery gets up and gets running, you'll have about 28 people who will accompany Lewis and Clark, including York, an African-American slave. Okay? Now, their job was to go out, explore, and to establish good relations with the Native Americans, stimulate interest in trading, okay, and to figure out what's out there, okay? So good luck. Lewis and Clark expedition begins in the spring of 1804. It, in the beginning, does not go very well, okay? They make it out to the Rocky Mountains. They almost die, okay? And they probably would have died, was it not, for Sacagawea, okay? The Shoshone Indian who will join the group, okay, become an interpreter and guide, okay, and her knowledge really of the area makes the expedition successful, okay. She is a diplomat to other Native American groups. She knew the languages, or at least she knew enough to help them negotiate with some of the Native American tribes they ran into. Her presence with a baby was interpreted as really good luck, and Lewis and Clark were considered peaceful because they had a Native American woman with them who also had a baby. And so that helped them overcome some pretty big obstacles. When you look at the route that they take, you realize that it is huge, okay? So they start there in St. Louis, they push up the Missouri River, they head west across the northern part of really the United States, across the Yellowstone River, okay? And eventually, by November of 1805, make it to the Pacific, okay? Anybody want to walk that? Anybody want to get in a flat bottom boat and kind of live on the rivers for a few years? No, okay? And you got to remember, this is tough. All of those groups that you see up there, excuse me, are Native American groups that they ran into. Okay, some weren't very pleasant. Okay, you can see that September of 1804, they almost got into a skirmish with the Teton Sioux. Okay, they catch a break every now and then. They ran out of horses. They needed horses, and they wander upon a group of Native Americans, and it turns out that they were Sacagawea's. It was Sacagawea's brother, long lost brother. She had been kidnapped as a child and taken in to another group, which happened among the Native American tribes. And so they have a family reunion, and of course, because it's Sacagawea, they get horses. Okay, so all sorts of good things happen. Okay. And it is they write about, I want to say about 1 million words in their journals that are, at one time, were almost lost. Sacagawea saved them from an overturned canoe. What would have happened if they had been lost? But they really chart and write down what they find. And yes, this is going to be part of the guide that will eventually open this up to settlement, okay, once they start to figure out what's out there. There's another major expedition that leaves St. Louis in 1806, okay, that's Pike's expedition, sorry. Zebulon Pike will leave St. Louis in 1806, push his way all the way out into the Rocky Mountains, and of course, today Pike's Peak is named after him. He turns south, and of course ends up in Spanish territory. They arrest him, okay, and take him back to Louisiana and dump him out. Okay, get out of here. Okay, so but Pike does make it all the way into the Rocky Mountains, and then when he turns south, some of his reports are going to be some of those things that encourage people to go and start to move into Texas. Okay. So these 3 years really is when the exploration of the West begins to kick off. Now remember, you got 2 Wests, okay? This is now the West, okay? When you look up here around the Great Lakes and Ohio and Indiana and these territories up here, that's the old Northwest now, okay? So that was the first really western area of the nation. Now, since we've added this territory, we've got a whole new chunk of land out there that we have to deal with. All right. Now we get to the story that spurred on the musical, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about Burr. If you guys remember, Aaron Burr ran for president with Thomas Jefferson in 1800, finished tied with him in the Electoral College, but was defeated in the House of Representatives vote and has been vice president ever since. Okay. Burr had been born in New Jersey, had fought with the Continental Army in the Revolutionary War. He'd become a lawyer and was Hamilton's biggest rival. They did not like each other in their later days. Okay. And has been vice president of the United States from 1801 to 1805. But Jefferson is not going to ask him back. What a shock. Okay. Jefferson does not want him back because of what had happened in the 1800 election, right? So Jefferson has no desire to ask Aaron Burr to come back and be the vice president. And Burr knew that. And so Burr gets involved in a scandalous relationship with the Federalist Party. Now, he has been a Democratic Republican for a while, but he is going to flip. And the Federalists are going to recruit him to run for governor of New York. There's a plot afoot, okay? There is a cadre, if you will, of very high-placed Federalists who are plotting, perhaps, even though nobody would really say this, okay, but they were thinking about leaving the Union, taking these Federalist strongholds out of the Union. And that's why they want Hamilton out of the way, and they want Burr in charge of New York, hoping that he will take New York out with them. Hamilton would never do that. Okay? Hamilton, remember, big fan of the Constitution, right? So Hamilton would never consider states leaving the Union. And so Burr gets recruited by this group of people to run for governor of New York, okay? Hamilton speaks out pretty vehemently against Burr prior to the governor's election in New York. Calls him unfit, calls him a liar, okay? And really goes after him pretty hard. Burr will lose the election. Of course, blames Hamilton for it. And because of the things that Hamilton had said, he challenges Hamilton to a duel. Now, the duel is shrouded in mystery. The actual duel itself, we don't know exactly what happened. And of course, it depends on who you talk to about what happens next. But dueling technically was illegal, okay, in New York. So they have to actually cross the river and go to New Jersey to duel. Dueling had become an art in a lot of ways of gentlemanly honor. If I said something bad about you, to maintain your honor, you challenged me to a duel. You pick the date, you pick the time, you pick the place, and you say, we're going to duel. Most gentlemen would call it quits if both of you showed up. Okay? So if the duel is supposed to take place this morning and you both show up, you have your best friend with you. He's called your second. And the seconds get together and they say, they negotiate with one another. And you maybe apologize, and both sides apologize, and you shake hands, and that's it. Okay? And both of you walk away with some form of honor. You both showed up, you were both ready to die for what you said, but you've worked it out. Okay? So Hamilton and Burr both show up to the duel. The seconds try to work it out. They don't. And so really the next phase happens. They choose pistols. And what they decide to do is, well, they start to go through with it. Now, usually what happened, and you get to this point, is both sides fired into the air or fired into the ground, missed, and then you could say the duel was settled. Okay? Yeah.
But they also sometimes use weapons.
No. Nobody would do that. Because you got to be serious. Because especially, I don't want to have a blank in my gun because this isn't you don't have a revolver or a 9mm automatic. You got one shot. And so I certainly don't want to have my gun loaded with a blank and you decide to shoot at me. Okay? I'm going to get you back. What happens next, we aren't exactly sure. A lot of sources say that Hamilton turned and either did not fire or fired a shot into the air or into the ground. Burr shoots Hamilton. He will linger for a while, but then Hamilton dies within I think he lingers for a couple of days. Burr is in ruins. He's accused of murder, okay, and he flees to the west. So he hightails it out of New Jersey and heads west. Remember, this is the vice president of the United States goes out and fights a duel and kills the opposition party leader and then hightails it off into the west. Jefferson orders Burr's arrest for treason, especially after Burr got involved in a scheme to try to break away part of the Louisiana Purchase and give it to Mexico. Okay. Burr does get arrested and is brought to trial, but a jury acquits him of treason because of a lack of witnesses. Burr, to kind of escape the murder charge, though, ends up going to England for a while and then coming back and practicing law until he dies. But the Burr conspiracy and the duel between Burr and Hamilton deprive the Federalists of their greatest leader, okay? And, of course, this makes Jefferson look bad, okay? And he has to deal with the ramifications of this as well. The Burr is out of the picture now, okay? But Jefferson has really the Federalists realize that they are on their way out too. And pretty soon you're going to find out that really the Federalists are really a dying party. Jefferson wins the election easily, okay? Jefferson wins the election in 1804 easily. But in 1805, things are getting a little bit serious. And Jefferson's second term as president is going to be consumed with foreign affairs, okay? We almost go to war. A lot of people say we should have gone to war, okay? But we don't. But his whole second term is going to be consumed with dealing with relations between us and Great Britain and France. And it's a disaster. If everything goes well for Jefferson's first term, everything goes bad for Jefferson in his second term, okay? Especially his foreign policy. Now, we look back on it today and we say Jefferson really screws up. No. We look back on it and say, well, I would have done this and I would have done that. Well, Jefferson considered those things too. The problem is that he had cut the military budget. We don't have a navy. We don't have an army. We don't have the ability to fight two of the world's major powers at the same time. We certainly don't have the ability to fight Britain. And so what do? Okay? Somebody calls you and says you're a coach of a little JV, little bitty pee-wee football team. Somebody calls you and says, hey, I want you guys to go and scrimmage Alabama this weekend. I will pay you $1 million. Okay? Do you do it? Why? Because those little kids are going to get killed, right? So you can't do that. They're going to get murdered. Okay? And that's what the situation Jefferson is in. Let's go to war. Great. With what? And if we go to war, we're going to get crushed. Is that really what we want to do? And so Jefferson tries to do the only thing he can, and that is a disaster. All right, we'll stop there. I'll tell you about the Embargo Act for our thing on Friday. I told the other class that we are kind of getting our way towards our next test, okay? So sometime today, I'm going to put up the study guide. And on Friday's lecture, I'm going to talk a little bit about it as well, okay? Because we're almost through with Jefferson. And so we'll talk a little bit about Jefferson, and then we'll talk about the study guide on Friday. So make sure that you guys look at that, okay? All right, see you guys.